Today we have an extra special guest, somebody I've been wanting on the podcast for a while now. His name is Sebastian Morton. He produces as ROCAsound. He is a Grammy-nominated composer, producer, remixer. He is definitely one of today's most eclectic and innovative musicians in the LA scene, both with major label artists producing and remixing for them. As far as film and composition, he's worked on TV shows like Young Sheldon, The Orville, Mr. Robot, films like Robocop, Houdini, Iron Man 2, as well as the Spongebob Movie. Sebastian has worked with some amazing artists such as Seal, Sting, Fat Joe, Ricky Martin, Rick James, Counting Crows, Shakira, Kaskade, Santana, Enrique Iglesias, and the list keeps going. A lot of good stuff in this episode. Before we dive in, just wanted to let you know if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, you will be the first to get new episodes and other free downloads and Ableton packs and devices I'm sending out. If you want to join, go to liveproducersonline.com/newsletter. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, please leave a like and review if you don't hate the podcast. Much love. Thanks everybody for listening. Make sure you check out links in the show notes to give Sebastian a follow. And without wasting time, let's jump into this episode. Thanks for joining the podcast again. And
thank you.
I think I might have met you for like 2 seconds, really briefly, at East West Studios for Loop 2018. Were you there?
I don't think I was there. No, not that one. I was at a couple of things, but maybe I was.
Maybe your doppelganger.
Maybe. I don't think I was in that one. No, I was at a couple of the unveilings and some parties and stuff and some NAMM stuff, but I think I missed that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was a cool experience. So I'm wondering if they'll ever do another Loop in the US, or at least in the next 5 years or so.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, they've done it in Berlin, I think for a while. I think they've only done it once in the US, right?
Yeah, but I mean, just like here, I get invited to the artist, being an artist of theirs, just the artist meetups and stuff. And there's so many users, like just in LA alone, that I'm sure, like, if you took the whole US plus whoever flew in, it would be like massive.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Although it would be a good excuse to go to Berlin. Have you ever been over there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you got to go. It's amazing.
It's on the list, it's on the bucket list. What did you do in Berlin when you were there?
Like touristy or work-wise?
I mean, either one.
Well, I actually went there because one of my good friends was the director of Native Instruments.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of went there, visit him, kind of do some native stuff. I'm also their artist, so just kind of did some fun stuff, unveiling new products, things like that. And then I got to like just hang out and watch amazing electronic music. And it's a great city. Very, very cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, it's like the techno capital of the world, and obviously Ableton's there. So many other larger companies too.
Yeah.
Did SoundCloud start in Berlin, or did I make that up in my head?
Well, they started in Germany, but I'm not sure if they started there. Native and Ableton are like the two giants. Who else? I think like some boutique companies that make cool synths.
Yeah.
Waldorf isn't from there, but they're close.
Cool.
It's actually a big film music hub too now.
I've heard that.
Yeah, like Nathan McKay, who's like the composer for Industry for HBO, is there, and so is the Oscar winner for The Joker, Hilder. She's there. So a lot of cool, like very eclectic artists there.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
You have a pretty interesting list of credentials as far as like film, because I don't know, a lot of people I've interviewed on the podcast or people I just met in general, it seems like they typically either live on the side of working with artists in the studio world, or they're more focused on like TV and film. But very rarely do I see, in my own experience, like people doing a ton of both. And you're one of those rare exceptions of people who have done a lot of both with major artists and in the film world.
Maybe because I'm older. So like I've been able to jump around a little more. Well, no, it really is kind of because I think I jumped into film from having worked on a lot of records. So it seems like as of now, I do more film than actual records. But yes, I try to keep my, hands in both games. It really is kind of coexisting now, though, with artists, like Junkie XL and Trent Reznor and even Nathan McKay, who I just mentioned. There's countless electronic music producers or even DJs that still tour or still have their bands, and they also do like Marcus Mumford did Ted Lasso. It's interesting. Like, I think a lot of those worlds are kind of mixing. Mm-hmm. I came into it because I was more of a electronic music producer. I kind of come from not like the fame and glory of like a touring guy like Junkie XL or something, but more like, more of a studio nerd who specializes in synthesis and all that. And I happened to study film score, so at the time, which was around 2010, I think, when I kind of really got into it, none of these guys were doing this stuff. It was very like, the big guys are touring and doing festivals and making records, and then the film scorers are the orchestral guys, and they kind of just have ghost producers under them, or they hire people or whatever. And I came in a little bit more like, somebody who was almost like a Brian Eno coming in to mess the sound up of traditional orchestral composers. That's one of my friends who, first hired me was like, yeah, I kind of feel like you're my producer. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I guess it is kind of like that.
Yeah. I saw a video you posted on your YouTube channel, I don't know, 2 years ago. It's talking about a lot of directors who have lived in that more traditional classical orchestral world are now more than ever seeking to kind of create a hybrid with more of a modern approach, whenever that looked like with a blend of electronic production, some of that more sonic sound, digital sound blended with that analog orchestral transient type of feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that mostly stems from Hans Zimmer, because, Hans is, I mean, he has Remote Control Productions, which is a massive conglomerate of studios in Santa Monica where there's lots of film composers. But here's the thing. A lot of people think that it's like a factory, and that's where they get it wrong. It's not like Hans is sitting in Malibu sipping pina coladas and everyone's doing his scores. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people, but they kind of make him sound like that. Like, he kind of just comes in once in a while and goes like, yeah, that's great, send it. It's actually like a lot of sound designers, producers, synth guys have like their station. And then they all kind of make incredible loop libraries, or it's almost like if Heaviosity made you a sound pack for every movie you make, instead of just using Damage. It's like, imagine if they were at your beck and call and you said, hey, I'm working on the new Chris Nolan movie I'm working on Batman, whatever. I need the coolest sounds on earth, dark, distorted, incredible, go for it. It's like he has 5 or 6 people doing that. And then he gets fed this new palette per project. And that's kind of where the Spitfire audio stuff kind of branched off of, when they started seeing like, oh, I see. So it's not like you have a bunch of ghost producers using libraries and then you put your name on it. It's that you put your name on it and then you make incredible libraries for your own project. And then you start off as that being your palette.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's kind of where I came in when directors started, seeing like, okay, cool. We need this to sound different. We need this to sound modern. We need this to sound punchy. Yeah. We don't want the orchestra at the stage at Abbey Road playing timpanis and bombos. That's not what Hans's sound like.
Sure.
But they don't know why it sounds like, because by the time the director comes in to a Zimmer score, he's already mocked up hours of music. So they don't actually see the contact session of the original sounds. They just hear the final cue, demo,
Yeah.
which is never a demo
Yeah.
when it's Hans, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and it's like, and slowly, even Hans himself started realizing that it's like directors started, even after paying $300,000 for the best orchestra in London and in LA, they used to go back to the demos and be like, why does that sound punchier and cooler? Why did we spend this money? No offense to orchestras, it's not their fault.
Right.
And that's, I think, where Spitfire Audio and all of them kind of started getting together and going like, hey, you know, we have an opportunity here because people don't understand just how much sound design goes into even an orchestral session.
Yeah.
Like those spiccatos that you hear on Batman stuff, that's not like, you don't just get the conductor to, you know, baton down and those things sound in your face and distorted and beautiful. It's like it's layers upon layers of different takes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you bring in players by section, so you get the whole orchestra, and then you bring in 6 violinists, 6 cello players, and all they do is close mic spiccatos on top of the spiccatos.
Yeah.
And then you take those spiccatos and you slice them, requantize them, pass them through some cool transient designer stuff and all that, and layer those over the orchestra.
Boy.
And that becomes part of the final mix. The sessions that are sent to engineers now are like above 500 tracks, 700 tracks.
It's a lot of mixing.
Spiccatos alone, I've seen, can take up to 80 to 90 tracks. Just that type of thing, the 16 note thing. So it's like, it's crazy.
That's extremely time intensive, I imagine, just from like a mixing, a production standpoint and the composing.
That's why you bring in other guys.
Yeah.
That's why you bring in other guys.
It's kind of like a shortcut.
Yeah. But, you know, it's like, unfortunately, they see all these credits and they think like, oh, well, yeah, if you've got 20 people working on the score, then what did you write? You know? But it's not really like that. It's really more of a sonic thing. It's more of a production thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where it stemmed from, that I started getting into film because I started getting called for, you know, my chops as somebody that makes punchy stuff, whether it's loops, distorting organic strings, things like that, like, you know, sound designing vintage keyboards, you know, before Stranger Things, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious just to like recap the process, and I'm sure it's not always exactly the same depending on who you're working with and the score or whatever. But let's say, for example, you worked with the London Symphony, Iron Man 2, all these different films. Do you typically create, like you were saying, that loop library? That's like a custom sample library, whatever you want to call it, and then present that for the orchestra to like play on top of? Or do they typically give you a piece that's already scored from the orchestra and then you're building based off of what you've been given? Like, what does that process look like? I'm curious. And is it always changing?
Yeah, it's always changing. Now I'm more of a composer myself. You know, I go in with the orchestra with everything mocked up, orchestrated, all the tracks are, you know, ready to go, pre-mixed, all that kind of stuff. But when I started with Iron Man 2, it was the situation I was explaining. I worked with John Debney on that, who I've worked with several projects, who's at the level of Hans. You know, his take was that he was looking for something very specific for Iron Man. He didn't want just sound libraries. He didn't even want a loop library. What he wanted to do was, at the very beginning, Tom Morello was already signed on because he did the guitars for Iron Man 1. So Tom Morello was there with some other incredible, you know, rock guys, not Rage, but at that level.
Cool.
And it all started with taking sessions that were recorded of Tom basically like shredding out with an incredible metal, like rock ensemble. And I got called in to kind of take those raw elements and sort of remix them into something that was less of that AC/DC Iron Man 1 style. Because they changed, the director didn't want that. He didn't want it to sound like AC/DC on the second part. He wanted something more complex.
Yeah.
So for that one, I started with the rock band and Tom's guitars, and then I kind of crafted all kinds of loops, sound designs, even like just musical segments and things like that that could go under orchestration. And then as the cues were kind of written, then I came back in post and I added a bunch of synths and distorted textures and took some of the elements and, sound design off of that. Then we went to Abbey Road, recorded the big orchestra. And then after that, I took the orchestra and did some of the techniques I told you about layering spiccatos with fake spiccatos,
Yeah.
At times I would, you know how you drum replace sometimes and add a hi-hat?
Totally.
Well, what I would do is I would take like noise samples that were very punchy or like top loop, small, almost like modular hits and put them on every 16th note of a spiccato.
Oh, interesting.
And then I would kind of ride it with the dynamics. And so some of the spiccatos sounded like almost like an arpeggiator spiccato.
Whoa.
Almost like you held down a finger and it went like, but you could hear that it was a real orchestra, but there was something on top of it that was somehow kind of percussive.
Emphasizing it just a little extra, that extra punch.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. I've used Envelope Follower in Ableton for adding some layers and keeping it really tight with other elements that it was following. Yeah.
Right.
That's really cool. So would you say that a lot of your experience with remixing artists before you got into the composing and all this stuff was really helpful, just as far as manipulating stems with artists? And, yeah, because you had a lot of history of doing that, I would imagine, even before.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I mean, first of all, it's also why I got the gig to begin with, because directors and John and several other people in the industry kind of heard some of my tracks and things I'd done, both with remixes and production. And they really liked the approach of being a little more musical than just doing a big epic EDM thing or something. It was always a little more like radio friendly in a way, more than club. So because they knew the original, it kind of seemed interesting. Even the way I got into Ableton is that way.
Really? What version was that?
It was really interesting. Version 3.
Oh, wow. So that's been a minute.
Oh, yeah. 2003. I remember because I went to Berkeley, then I studied film scoring, and then I came to LA, but my first gigs weren't really doing film. It was doing pop records with a big producer, and he was working with Ricky Martin and with Santana and, a lot of really big artists back then. And so I started kind of doing just kind of the Max Martin kind of vibe sound-ish. While I was doing that, I started really meeting a lot of British artists here in LA that were part of the acid jazz scene and the drum and bass scene and all that. So I kind of started branching away from pop. I started doing remixes and, eventually did a remix for Duran Duran for Capitol Records. And it was like my kind of like, they were one of my heroes. So I was like blown away and I was like, this is my moment, it's got to be amazing.
Yeah.
So I spent like a lot of time doing that. And then, I get the call and the A&R's like, guess what? We got kind of in a bind with Duran Duran and they're leaving the label. I'm like, what do you mean? So what happened to the remix? And he's like, man, I love this remix. So trust me, we'll make something work. And I was like, yeah, right. I'll never hear from this guy again.
Right.
And then lo and behold, 2 weeks later, my manager gets a call and it's the A&R guy. And he's like, how about if we put Sting on top of this track? And I'm like,
wow.
What?
The small name.
Yeah. So take off Duran Duran. We put Sting on the chords. We change them. And he's got this song from Sacred Love called Never Coming Home. And he loves the track. He just wants to sing over it. And then we're going to put it out on the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy label, which is owned by Kappa. And it's going to be the biggest label of 2002 or something.
It's a nice
and I was
surprise.
like, done.
Yeah.
So I actually went into the studio with Sting, who was awesome, very generous.
Cool.
And we did the track, and, it came out, and he still loves it. Like, I go to his shows and he still remembers that. But
Amazing.
what that led to was working with Capitol Records, which led to Sting's label, Interscope. And that's where the funny Ableton story comes in. Until that point, I was this is like early 2000s. So until that point, I was like all hardware, MPCs, still got them. Got a 3000, which I love. I just can't part with them. And my 4000, and, I got the Octatrack and stuff. But
yeah,
back then it was like, so limited, man. It's like, what do we have? 16 tracks, 32 tracks in Pro Tools. Reason, there wasn't much. So I had a very audio hands-on approach to remixing, which was, I would take the vocals off of DAT or ADAT or DA88, fly them in, put them in time, and then I would make all the production, with analog gear and MPCs, start layering them in audio, and then kind of start doing my editing.
Yeah.
MIDI wasn't even a factor, so after the Sting thing, Interscope was like, oh, we got a bunch of stuff for you. And first thing is it's the anniversary of the Counting Crows hanging around.
Oh, wow.
It's been 10 years and we're putting out a new radio single for England and all that. And we need a remix, but we don't need a dance remix. It needs to be just like, what would Fatboy Slim do with the Counting Crows? I'm like, okay, I like Fatboy Slim. That's cool. And then he goes, here's the caveat, though. You're going to work with Adam Duritz, the singer, and I'm like, that's awesome.
Sure,
and he's
why
like,
not?
yeah, but he's pretty particular. And I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Good luck.
And then little did I know, right? But
that's funny.
So here was what happened, though. I talked to Adam, and he's like, yeah, we're ready to go. We don't have any of this digital. So Interscope is passing the tapes down right now, and you're going to get a CD with all the stems. And I'm like, well, what do you mean a CD? Like, how am I going to sync it up?
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't know.
Figure it out,
I'm like,
man.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah. I mean, I'm a newbie, so I'm like, yeah, whatever. I got it.
You always say yes.
So we fly, always. So we fly in the stems, and they're all out of order. So we're there like, and then, okay, so finally we kind of pieced the band together. Some things came in later, and it wasn't like there was the exact amount of time before the take to where if you put the dead silence, it kind of all works.
That's the worst.
So I call the label, and I'm like, they don't sync up. And he's like, oh, Adam didn't tell you? And I'm like, what? They didn't do this to a click. And I'm like, yeah, but they should. But I heard the final mix. They still all played in time. He goes, oh, no. They all overdubbed. And I'm like, they overdubbed without a click? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, tell me the drummer overdubbed first. He's like, we're not so sure.
Oh, my God.
So anyway, man, it's like, I'm like, oh, my God, I'm going to get fired for sure. And so then my friend, a guitar player, who was my partner at the time, doing a bunch of stuff, he goes, dude, have you heard of Live? And I said, yeah, but isn't that thing like Reason? Isn't it kind of like, to toy around for people that don't know music and stuff? And he's like, no, dude. He goes, no, it's amazing. I go, what does it do? And he goes, all right, send me all those stems from the CD. So he brings up his laptop. He pulls up Live 3. And he goes, give me an hour. And like, after an hour, he goes, okay, check this. The rhythm section is in time. And I'm like, come on. And he plays it, and it's like in time. Not only is it in time, it's tighter than the original recording. And I'm like, how'd you do that? And he goes, dude, all you have to do is grab these warp markers, and you just start seeing where all the transients hit, and you start kind of warping it back.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like it's like, are you nuts? Like, why would you do that to every single track? But
Yeah.
you have to understand that before this, it
Sure.
was Rex.
Yeah.
Like we had to go in there and manually slice everything pre-live,
Oh yeah.
and then trim it back and crossfade everything.
Yeah, we're really spoiled today.
Oh man. So
So
it was
spoiled.
like I literally like it would take 3 days just to have the original session
Ah, damn.
ready
This
to be
sounds
remixed.
painful. It sounds
It
like
was
a
horrible,
headache.
man. But fast forward and you start realizing that when somebody sends you a bunch of orchestral takes, it's kind of a piece of cake compared to out of time stems of
Yeah.
rock bands,
Yeah.
that didn't record to a click.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's where the live, like after that one thing, I always had live, like every single update. And in fact, I got in with the guys because I told Olaf, who was the head of Ableton in Berlin, I told him the story, and he was like, I got to see this session. It's like, and I'm like, yeah, I got to pull it up one day. It's nuts.
Probably have
So-
some trauma when you open that set. You look at
Oh
it
my
again.
God. Wow.
Yeah.
No, things were worse before.
Yeah. I've heard that story many times. A lot of people moved to Ableton because of really two things, just the warping with the audio and time stretching and MIDI. I mean, those are two
Yeah.
of like the bread and butter of Ableton back in the day, really, comparing to anything else that was out there.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And especially in film, the capacity to have kind of a loop browser that plays, like the big Ableton thing that really kind of sold a lot of composers was how it would, play back your loop library, your clips library to whatever tempo you were at the moment.
Yeah, that's nice.
That was like, before that, there really was only Dr. Rex in Reason. And that didn't work out that well because you had to Rex the file before even doing it.
Yeah.
So you go back to this prehistoric Counting Crows type of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like you got to sit there and like slice every single loop in your library just to check it out later.
The preview option and everything warped in time is so nice.
Amazing. And we still do that, after every orchestral session or after every project, I slice musical segments of the best moments of the score. Of like it can be some violin, some percussion, some loops, some little percolating thing we recorded, guitars, whatever. I kind of make 4-bar loops, 8-bar loops, and just kind of keep them in clips, with their plugins, all that. And then, maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line, I was like, oh, and on that one industrial score, is like there was this super cool, like little percussive thing. Boom, it's like I can preview it, pop it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool.
So I imagine that you're getting quite a bit of stems these days, depending on the project of an orchestra. Like how many stems? What's the most amount of stems that you've been sent before to remix, say, for example?
700.
That's overwhelming. That stresses me out.
Because you got all the mic positions too. I mean, for the most part, engineers are very cool. And before, it all depends on the deadline, because sometimes these deadlines are crazy. But if the engineer gets gets a chance to kind of submix the stuff,
yeah,
that's the best. And if they can do it on the stage console, like, a lot of times you record on these beautiful, like Neve 88 RSers, just these SSL dualities and stuff. And at times what we do is, as after the orchestral session, you just start kind of bouncing down little mixes of cool stuff. Like even mixes that aren't necessarily like, oh, this is a beautiful string pass of all the mic sounding really good and the strings. Sometimes it's something weird, like at Air Studios when we were doing the Robocop score. Sometimes you got these weird percussion hits when they were actually setting up that kind of reverberated in the gallery, and it was like, kind of an anvil or a crash hammer that just went like, whoa, whoa, or something cool.
Yeah.
And, I'd ask the engineer, like, hey, man, just clip that and put it on your desktop. Like just anything that can be kind of like, wow, okay, that's not a synth, it's not a sample, it's not from a library, but it's like super cool.
Yeah.
lot of those things happen organically,
Yeah.
you know?
I actually
And
did a remix, the Indianapolis Symphony,
oh, cool.
and I worked with a hip hop artist. They had like a rap culture event basically where they did a dedication to like rap culture with the
Yeah.
symphony. And I was asked to sit in to remix. That was like a crash course. One thing I did, kind of like what you were saying, is taking those little imperfections or pieces or just
Yeah.
room noise or something. And there was just like some extra echo and noise in the room. I took that and I used that as an impulse response and the convolution reverb to apply to the other instruments that I was using to try to make a cohesive sound.
Exactly.
It really just tied a lot of stuff together. It was actually kind of fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. So that's it. That's it. It's a lot of that. And nobody's ever sampled Air Studios, the convolution. I don't know if they don't let you or if, but you've got, actually, now that I think of it, they don't have Abbey Road either, like on Altiverb and all those. Yeah,
That's true.
So we've
I love Altiverb.
yeah, they have the American stages like Fox, Sony. Yeah. So, we've taken a few kind of not gunshot, but like clave or something.
Yeah.
We've taken some impulse responses.
Cool.
But the ones that come from the instruments themselves are the coolest, like
Yeah.
when they decay and cut off or something.
That's awesome. There's a billion ways to go about that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
let me ask you, I never received more than like, I think 70 stems. They submixed the orchestra down for me quite a bit. But what's your approach typically if you're receiving that many stems, say from an orchestra or whatever? In Ableton, maybe we can get a little more specific. Like what does your approach typically look like when you're importing that in and just organizing it, starting to mess with stuff?
Well, I organize that kind of stuff in Pro Tools still.
Okay.
Just because the session comes in Pro Tools. And I also have an HDX system, so I have tons of voices.
Nice.
When I do that, I'm not like making like final mixes that are going to end up in the score and stuff. So I don't spend there like, taking every single mic and kind of blending it perfectly and then doing that. It's more, sometimes I won't do anything with the orchestra. I'll just have them there as a guide. And so I'll just do kind of a nice bounce of, stems of a nice mix of the overall families of woodwinds, percussion, brass, etc. Then in Ableton, I start adding the percussive elements or whatever is needed, sometimes guitar stuff, sound design stuff, like droney stuff, all that kind of thing. And then sometimes something will happen with an overall stem of a family of like, say, the woodwinds or something. And, I really started getting into granular stuff in Ableton.
That's cool.
Mainly from going back to earlier versions of Live, I would make mistakes. Here, I'm going to stretch it like a minute, and you start getting the red notification, but then you start realizing that it goes down to the granular sample and it does all these weird artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started kind of taking note of like certain moments where that kind of stuff was really cool.
Yeah.
And I did that a lot with Iron Man 2, actually. Like some of the fills in sections are a drum fill or even a timpani fill that just goes like, taka-taka-tan. And then the last hit, I'll grab the transient, but I'll stretch the end to the point where it just kind of does that squealy kazoo-like thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard it.
Yeah.
And it just becomes like, or something like that. And then I'll ramp it up through the automation.
Yeah.
I'll kind of ramp up the tempo and I'll do like almost like techno snare fills from those ramps. So I create like, uplifters or whatever, like stuff you would hear from Vengeance.
Yeah.
From the orchestra.
That's cool.
Like directors love that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. And it's extremely organic. Nobody's going to have that exact sound.
That's exactly why.
Yeah.
The thing they hate the most is stuff like Vengeance. Like anything that seems like a cliche from the dance world. That kind of stuff, it's like instantly, nope. Like any type of filter rise that's just, typical or side chain things that are just, that dead mouse or no
Yeah.
offense to any of that. It just, to them, they're all really trying to put on a sonic stamp, even if they're not musicians themselves. They want to steer away from anything that's been done too much. So that's
Yeah.
why, like, I try to get those happy accidents and stuff.
And that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, we've all heard the Vengeance sample pack kind of orchestral fake sounds. I don't know. As a director, if I was a director, I would want to be the most original as possible. And obviously the music is really fueling the emotion and the energy of the trailer or what's happening in a scene or a transition. And so, yeah, it makes sense to me that you would want to steer away from any kind of splice sample pack sound.
Yeah, I mean, they're interesting if that's what you're going for in a certain track, but and it has nothing to do with them being bad samples because Vengeance has some cool stuff. It's more, it goes back to that Brian Eno kind of a thing. Electronic music is hard to define, first of all, because it's like, who started electronic music? It's like, was it Stockhausen? Is it modular? What? It's hard. Like Brian Eno is the Joshua Tree. U2. But what's electronic about the Joshua Tree? It's not that there's like synth filters, sweeps and arpeggiators and even vintage synths on that album. It's that the way they played with space echoes and delays and the Edge's guitar and even things that Peter Gabriel did early on had nothing to do with synths. Even Phil Collins's, infamous In the Air Tonight, Phil, which was the talkback mic on an SSL. You could call that electronic music. That was an electronic music moment where something was left and there was a feedback and it distorted and it filtered it, high passed it, and it became that fill. Director, and they reference electronic music, they don't reference EDM and they don't reference, that's not what they're meaning. What they mean is, what weird piece of gear or pedal or plugins are a little less sexy to them, but like what can you pass this through that will make it sound like something completely different, preferably dark and nasty.
Dark and nasty.
And
good.
It's like, that's why I have like the Fatso and some of the Overstayer stuff and the Culture Vulture and all that, because
love it.
At times you do that with them in the room. It's part of the time you kind of want to show off a little, but
of course,
but, just because you're like, check this out, but they love it because they feel like they get excited, kind of like. I've been in sessions with guitar players where they kind of plug in, they're playing an amp and it sounds like, yay, you sound like a guitar. And then they plug in their pedal board and everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
They got whammy pedals and they have cool Strymon crazy reverbs and, bucket brigade delays and things are feeding back into each other. And that approach is what directors look for in producers and electronic people. So the more you know about like turning organic sources into otherworldly ambient things or distorted things or things like that, the better off you're going to be in that world. Plugins work too. The only problem with plugins is that when you're doing it in real time, it loses a little bit of the manipulation effect. I mean, push is cool because I've been in situations, where the director doesn't have to look at my screen and be like, oh, yeah, so you're driving. So it's the drive that's doing that, or whatever. Yeah. It's like you give him the push and you're like, cool, this knob, turn it. And, the director himself kind of goes like this and like, the feedback goes crazy or I've got erosion on there and it's kind of like doing that kind of grain size thing. And they're like, whoa. And to be honest, man, that's the easiest way to get anything approved. Because it's kind of like, it's like, he played on it. So he's like,
Yeah.
be the best idea. But because he did one little tweak on push,
Yeah.
done.
Yep. And he feels like a producer. He's like, I turned that knob, I made this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we're still all musicians at heart, man. And the director,
Right.
you know, he wants that. It's not really, I mean, some directors never come into the room. But I mean, not even the director, sometimes the composer, you know, is the guy that doesn't really understand what Ableton does.
Sure.
And you start kind of showing them some of the things you can do with push, and they're like blown away, you know, even just the slicing aspect of it, you know, the grid slicing stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
You know,
that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. They're probably more invested if they can be in person and see the results and make them feel more a part of it by touching fun buttons and things. And also, like, a lot of work can be done remotely too. I'm sure you've done quite a bit remotely as well.
Yeah.
I would like to talk to you. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to kind of get in the weeds a little bit about some other things in your process. Especially with like sound design. Because, well, first of all, like, what are some of your favorite sound design moments you've worked on?
Well, Iron Man 2 was very, very cool because that one was stages of sound design. Like I think I touched on a bit about first starting with Tom Morello stuff, then doing the orchestral stuff, then doing my own stuff over it, and then kind of going back in post and producing the whole sound overall.
Yeah.
You know, that was really cool because it kind of touches on all the stages of sound design. Sound design for me is that Brian Eno thing that we spoke of, which is how do I take something recognizable and mundane, possibly organic, but maybe not, and make it something that is almost a hook in itself, which to me is what Brian Eno does, because even what he did with Paul Simon and stuff on his record, even with Coldplay, it's like sometimes he'll just take a little loop but it's kind of a loop of a tape or something, and it just becomes the rhythm of the track, and then you add drums on top of that. My sound design moments usually involve something musical like that. I had a really cool time doing Houdini with Adrian Brody.
That's cool.
That was really cool for Hulu. The reason that was so cool is that, you know, I went into it thinking that they wanted, you know, something like a Sherlock Holmes kind of orchestral organic score, but the director actually wanted like an industrial score, partly industrial, like dark Nine Inch Nails industrial, and also part metal sound, like metallic sounds, like locks, clicks, keys, clocks, anything metallic, because a lot of Houdini's situations were, you know, that he was trapped against time, and it involved handcuffs, or it involved a jail cell, or it involved getting out of a vault underwater, or like, you know, crazy stuff. Yeah. And he wanted to play up the kind of subconscious feeling of that cold metal against your skin. And so instead of adding a bunch of sound effects, what I did is that I would make a lot of rhythms from handcuffs and keys, locks, Zippo lighters, anything metallic I could get my hands on, like even just brushes on a laptop, and then coins on, you know, I had a hang drum brought in, anything you could imagine. And I kind of did some Foley on that. And then I started building loops in Ableton that were like these strange kind of randomized slices of metallic things.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool. And it's what led me to like my obsession with the Octatrack and things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm doing a lot with Ableton is using randomizer.
Okay.
And because what I ended up doing on that score is that I would take a bunch of different 8-note patterns or things like that I did, that I step sequenced, and then I would randomize slices in drum tracks or in Simpler.
Oh.
And every slice had a different metallic sound. So say the bottom of the keyboard was like dark, maybe like an anvil hit or like a drum case hit with something metallic. And then the top of it was a coin. And so then I would kind of randomize 61 slices or something like that. And I would automate the randomize button so that every 4 loops, it kind of turned back onto a different slice. And it ended up, a lot of times it didn't work, but a lot of times 8 bars of that just had this killer rhythm where like, it just happened to be that the 1s and 3s landed on the downbeat, and then the upbeats were something kind of brighter. So it almost sounded like a beat.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stayed in. Like there's moments where he's taking off the handcuffs and it sounds like a clock, but it's those beats.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, different. And then you can also randomize, step sequence the filters. So like if something was too bright, then at that moment, I kind of, you hear a little bit of a sweep, but just on an 8th note. Things like that,
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. Yeah. Very cool stuff.
I've always been fascinated with sound design with Foley. I think it's just that organic, raw texture that I think when you hear something that's like in our natural environment or world, it almost resonates with you so much differently than something that's not a natural sonic capability that you hear in our typical day-to-day environment. Like keys is obviously more natural, like we have that, or like just the tapping of metal, things that we can more naturally as humans associate with and like resonate with somehow. So
totally. And now the found sound thing is like crazy. And people, doing all these recordings of rivers and creeks and nature and all that. It's very cool. I mean,
no, it's great, man. I was watching on Instagram, I'm going to draw a blank on his name, but the guy that did sound design for the first Jurassic Park, maybe you know who that is, but he was talking about layering a baby elephant for the T-Rex. So the T-Rex sound is actually a baby elephant layered with like 5 other things. I think he did some kind of like weird drum, like djembe in a cave or something, and stretched it out with a baby elephant and like 3 other layers to create that kind of wild, just T-Rex scream. It was really fun. I know for the movie Transformers, they filmed a lot of the Foley, or recorded a lot of the Foley in a junkyard. It went to like a scrap metal yard and just started smacking random stuff. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. All that stuff, composers do a lot of that stuff too. Like Eskimo, Brendan Angelidis, who did Billy's, before he even got that show. In fact, I think he got that show because he's such a genius at that found sound thing. Like he even has an NPR. You should check it out. He kind of does looper little performances, but a lot of his records have really unrecognizable but natural kind of sources that he tweaked. And they're super cool.
Yeah.
And so
I love that. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something I want to do more with my own music personally, just because the fun, like the nature of it is just fun. I mean, nobody else is going to create that sound ever. It's going to be original.
I know. It's amazing. Yeah, you should.
Yeah, definitely. I recorded a goose and I turned it into a synthesizer once.
I bet you did. Did it sound like a Moog bass or something?
It wasn't a bass. It was more of kind of like a mid-frequency synth. It sounded like a saw. It was like a sawtooth kind of synth sound. Yeah, layered.
That's cool.
Layered it. I think I layered it with Omnisphere or something. Anybody who's listened to this podcast long enough knows that I had a serious goose problem outside of my front porch. There was just too many of them.
So you made the best of it?
Yeah. So I was like, I can either beat them or join them. I might as well.
There you go.
Might as well make a sample pack out of it or something.
Oh, I've done that so many times. I had I remember when my computer used to crash, it made this horrible sound. And then it would kind of stay recorded in the WAV file. So when you brought up the session the next time,
oh really?
The end was just this horrible distorted white noise. And we ended up starting to keep some of those because some of them started getting really weird.
That's awesome.
Like sometimes the end of the take would just kind of do like a like that Verify plugin that sounds like a stop on a tape machine. Like it would just go like, you know, just like some demonic stuff and started happening. We started kind of trimming a lot of this stuff.
That's great. I love that.
So I know the feel.
Yeah, the computer crashing sample pack.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm imagining like the terrible dial-up sound that we used to have to listen to every time we connected to the internet, and it took like 10 minutes.
Oh my God, America Online, AOL.
Ah, it's the worst. That was the worst sound of any computer I've ever heard.
That was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like the computer was in pain.
Yeah, I won't use that.
Well, are there any specific, I know we're short on time, but are there any specific
All right, go ahead, man. We got some time.
Any specific Ableton devices or instruments that are just always your go-to? You talked about using like randomization. You talked about maybe the simpler with slice mode. You talked about some other things.
Yeah, I use some of the K devices stuff too. They have some very cool. They started coming out with a lot of randomization stuff. So I used their plugins before things like Simpler or Drum Racks.
Yeah.
I love the new Drift.
Yes.
Synth. Very cool.
Yes.
I haven't explored it quite enough, but I see the potential, and
it's incredible.
I've always loved. I kind of always did what that does with pedals. But I just love having that in one environment. Very cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean the dynamic tube is actually spectacular.
Yeah, it is.
One of my favorite effects. I'm guessing. I mean, they used the Culture Vulture as a inspiration for that, judging by the ABC thing. But it really is so unique. Like it has a pretty unique stamp. Erosion, very cool.
Yes, love Erosion.
I've been using that forever.
Yeah,
great delays in general. Operator, there's so many. I've always been an audio guy, really. So my MIDI in Ableton is pretty limited. How I use it for MIDI, I'd say I use it more to slice audio as MIDI than I use it to make beats and things like that, because I'm just so hardware oriented in that way that just I always end up starting something with a piece of hardware, like a machine drum or a mono machine or an Electron something, or like my MPCs or, et cetera, or even me on a drum set or something. Yeah. And then Ableton is my tightener, slicer, manipulator / whatever, sound design. So really Simpler and Sampler are kind of my thing. Yeah. It's just the amount of time that I spend creating, and Drum Racks, of course, creating, my own kind of sample instruments.
Yeah.
Is where I spend a lot of the time.
It makes sense, because it looks like you have a lot of beautiful analog toys in there that can probably generate a lot of sound for you without needing to use MIDI. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's kind of like, it's hard. Even though I've tried to have I have several audio interfaces so that I can export something from Ableton through the hardware and then back into another Ableton on another computer, sometimes. And, I've started using Ableton like that, and it's really cool. But at some point here, something definitely gets routed out.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done a single mix that was 100% in the box.
Really?
Not just plugins, but also sources ever.
Yeah.
So
do you do quite a bit of like reamping, I would imagine, with some sounds and pedals? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the vibe. So that's why I keep so many clips in Ableton too.
Yeah. That makes sense. Do you a lot of times start ideas or loops in session view, or do you typically jump straight into arrangement for recording?
No, I do a lot in session view, actually, because I like kind of seeing how some things may go together. And I do a lot of resampling as well, because, like I said, at times, I'll take 3 or 4 days of just hardware loop creation. Yeah. Whether it's for a song, an album, a film, whatever it is. And then I'll take the greatest hits of those all trimmed up nicely, and I'll put them in my clips. And then
Right.
I'll start seeing, in session view kind of, oh, well, what's really cool is that these two synth arpeggios are kind of off, but in a cool way.
Oh,
So why don't we make that one sound? And then I'll resample that maybe through a couple cool plugins.
yeah.
And then that becomes its own clip, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's very modular in that way. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the way people use modular gear, where they kind of spend hours just making weird stuff, and then kind of they're recording the whole time, and then they go back and get the greatest hits.
Yeah.
I use Ableton for that a lot. That's like my main thing.
I'm very similar in that way, my workflow. I do a lot of resampling, freezing, flattening. Have you ever heard of the Max for Live device Bounce in Place? I've talked about it a few times on the podcast.
Yeah.
It's so easy for resampling. I always
Yeah.
key map it, and then I just hit a button, and then it just instantly, you can, depending on how you set up the device, you can have it take a direct input. Otherwise, resampling by default goes through the master post effects.
Yeah.
And so then you don't have to worry about hitting the limiter and everything on your master as well. And it's just really fast. You just hit one button, pops open a new track, records whatever you want it to do real fast.
Oh yeah, Max for Live is awesome. In fact, I
Yeah.
used to use Pluggo. Did you ever hear of that thing?
No, what is that?
That was Cycling 74's like universal like Max for Live, but for any DAW.
Oh wow.
And it was quirky and weird. It was all in Audio Suite. Man, I'm dating myself now.
Yeah,
But
that's cool.
it was crazy. That was one of the first like times that I had seen plugins be so weird, because at the beginning of the game, like, I mean, my game at least, like 99, plugins were meant to kind of be like your extra EQ or your extra little compressor, Bomb Factory,
No, yeah.
Sound Toys,
Yeah.
Echo Farm. They weren't like weird, tweaky stuff like they are now. So
Wait.
Pluggo Cycling 74 came with that suite of just weirdness. Like
Really?
the names didn't even make sense. Like it would just be like they were named after video game. I think one was called like Frankenstein or something. And you just, let's see what Frankenstein does, And it would just do this like low pitch kind of like demon voice kind of. It was weird. It was cool.
Yeah. Back in the day. I do love Sound Toys though. I use them quite a
Sound
bit
Toys
for
are great.
a lot of stuff. There's so many
For
plugins
sure.
out there. Seems like everybody and their grandma has a plugin company now. It's just so many.
Yeah.
But there was actually two new Max for Live devices I thought that were interesting that I started playing with. One is called Device Matrix. Have you seen that? Which I thought,
No.
whenever I have like a really heavy mix session in Ableton, it's kind of cool because if you have like hundreds of tracks or whatever, it's kind of a pain in the ass to have to click on every track just to see the chain, right?
Yeah.
So this solves that for you. It has one window that you can open, and then it shows all the tracks on the left and then all the devices in a row. And you can really quickly solo or dry wet mix any device you want really fast and see all of it in one place, which is kind of nice.
That's cool. I got to check it out.
Yeah, because that's been a complaint for a lot of people with mixing or mastering too. Because obviously in Pro Tools, you can have all of that in one place to see it pretty easily. So this solves
confess,
that.
I cannot mix in Ableton.
Really?
It's because, and I've been talking to my boys over there for years. I can't stand the fact that the master limiter is post. I'm sorry, that the master fader is post. Meaning that you always have to have it at 0. If you, like in Pro Tools, say you have like, you're ready to do like a little mix bus, right? So maybe you throw on a little SSL bus compressor and an EQ and then your ozone. What you do is when you're seeing how much you want to hit the SSL bus compressor, for example, you lower the master fader and it lowers your master bus. In Ableton, it doesn't. In Ableton, if you lower your master fader to -15, it's still as distorted as it was at 0.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? Because you have to make a group of all your tracks, then lower that group before it hits the first plugin on your master bus.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I can't stand that for the reason that I actually mix through my outboard gear. Like my whole mix goes through my Manleys and all that every single time. So when I'm in Ableton, I have to group everything. And I can't really have a dedicated master bus until I do that.
I wonder if you could do like the pre or post fader somehow on a return track, and then
but you have to kind of set
master.
it up.
You can make that your master instead. Yeah, you could create a template to do that, but I could see.
I know, but it actually doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to me even on like the way the real world works. Because if you look at the way any chain works, it works linearly. You know what I'm saying? Meaning like even on an SSL console, the sum of everything is what goes directly into the bus compressor. And then the master fader is the output of the sum plus bus compressor. Final thing is one fader, so you can do a fade out.
Yeah.
If you think about it, you can't even really if you do a fade out in live and you want it to not do less, meaning hit your compression less at the end, you still have to group everything and do everything from a VCA or a grouped track.
Yeah, because the master fader is like the final end of everything.
Well, the thing is, if you start lowering, it doesn't work the way it would work on a console.
Sure. Yeah, you'd probably have to automate like a utility or something at the beginning of your mastering chain if you want to do something.
Well, I told the way I visualized it to the Ableton guys, because they were like, well, why can't you just do that? Like, nobody really cares. And I'm like, okay, but imagine this. If you had to do that when we used to mix on consoles, you know what you would have had to do? You would have had to tie all the faders together, and then one guy would have to be pulling them down to do a fade.
That'd be impressive to watch, actually.
No, they laughed, and I'm like, that's what you have to do. Except in your case, we can group them, but it's not really a fade in that way.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess I've never really known any other way because, I grew up in the box for the most part, working with Ableton and Cubase and Pro Tools, not working with a ton of boards. So I could see how that would be a different approach or mindset. Yeah.
Well, the only reason it came up to me was because before knowing that, I kind of sent somebody a mix thinking that, oh no, this is how it happened actually. Because I was so used to the way that Pro Tools and every other DAW, by the way, Logic actually does it like worked, is that I actually bounced down a session and I was late and I was like really, really kind of like in a hurry. And so what I did is I lowered the master fader. I did my mix bus the way I always do it in Pro Tools. I lowered my master fader and then I bounced without listening. Then I got to the session, played it for the artist, and it was horribly distorted.
Right.
So I called my assistant and I'm like, hey man, what did it bounce wrong? What's going on? And he goes, no, I just pulled up the session and it's distorting like crazy. And I'm like, but I turned ozone that by -13. And he's like, well, yeah, but the thing is you turn down the limiter and you turn down the master fader, but they're not, the master fader is post.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh crap. So what he ended up having to do is just take all my plugins off.
Oh, wow.
And just give me like a version that didn't distort.
Yeah.
And it was annoying. And I was like, wow, that is so weird. I never realized that.
Yeah.
Until I tried mixing one. Anyway, but
I guess it's a good crash course to realizing how it all works.
Yeah, it's kind of how you hit compression. To me, how you hit a bus compressor is what I love the most about mixing.
Yeah.
Like I mix into, I have an SSLG bus compressor that I will just always use.
I love that thing.
It's so beautiful. And
Yeah.
like, even when I take stuff out of live, that will be the holy grail, meaning like, if it's over compressing, then I turn down live. I never turn down the threshold, because that thing, I've gotten so used to it. I've been working with it for 20 years that I know, like, there's certain sweet spots where it has this cool punch that is more about hitting it softer or louder than it is turning the threshold down. It does different things. It's quirky like that.
Interesting.
You know? Yeah. So like some people are like, well, just turn the threshold all the way down and it won't over compress. And I'm like, yeah, but it'll compress different. And I've shown them, I'm like, check this out. You'll see the needle go into 4, but I'm going to do it by turning live up and turning the threshold all the way down. They hear it that way. And now I'm going to turn down live and put the threshold like at -12. Same exact compression, but watch how it bounces faster.
Interesting.
And they're like, wow, that's true.
I'll have to play with that a little bit, because I have, I mean, I don't have actual hardware G-Bus, but I have the UAD version that I use on my masters that I love.
Yeah, I mean, inside live, how would you do that? I mean, I guess it would be, you would have to group up all your tracks.
Yeah.
And then lower them and see how it's affecting the compression.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll play with that. That's cool. Because, I mean, it does sound awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And
Ableton's glue compressor is supposed to model the G-Bus.
Yeah, that's the Cytomic made one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool.
I love turning on oversampling on that. If you right-click on it, you can turn on oversampling for it. And then if you just, I'll use that as a main distortion. Like, I'll just drive the makeup gain, turn on soft clip, and destroy stuff. Sounds so good.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, the UA the UA stuff is great for that. The API is really good for that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All those quirky, the manly stuff is beautiful. Yeah, they do quirky stuff. You know, it's like all these hardware things, like space echoes and stuff like that. Like, depending on how you hit it, it distorts differently.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, it's a little gripe I have about Ableton, but yeah, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I guess for all those people out there who are annoyed, I guess you just have to start grouping all your tracks. So
maybe some people don't even care. Maybe they like the way it kind of hits it like over slams the master bus or something.
Yeah, I guess so. Do you record? You have a patch, like, because you talked about modular and you like modular and stuff. Did you ever record modular into Ableton as a sampler instrument that you could just carry around, so you like sample, say, every note or something, so you wouldn't have to take that modular gear or piece of gear with you?
No, because it doesn't do the same thing. It's and plus it's like, I feel like other people have done that better.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like Softtube has a great, like, if I really want to take the experience of modular, I kind of will use like Softtube modular or some stuff like that. Because the thing with modular for me, like the thing with all my Electron boxes and all that, it's all about the happy accident.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't really sit in Ableton and like draw stuff in and make arpeggiators and do stuff like that. It's like, if I use an arpeggiator in Ableton, what I do is I've got the MIDI notes, but the MIDI notes are triggering my Prophet or a Juno or my Jupiter 8 or some of my modular stuff.
Right.
And that gets re-imported into live as audio.
Yeah.
So it never is really a situation where if I just took every oscillator from a fat modular sound, I wouldn't really go in there and kind of make an arpeggiator out of that sound or play a pad or something. I've done that, but it's more general. Like I'll record 4 notes from a Juno and just do some weird, you know, like kind of like what Drift does, where it kind of does this weird.
Yeah. Just like a slight pitch deviation. And
yeah, because there's such a like stretch between octaves that it does weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, Drift is really cool. I need to spend some more time playing with it. I talked to Mark Mosier. He was commissioned by Ableton to make a bunch of presets for it, and
Oh, cool.
got to see him do a presentation on it. It just sounds incredible, and it's really cool
Yeah.
that it's available in all versions of Live now. So I mean, if
Yeah.
you buy a cheap, like 25 key MIDI keyboard, most likely you're going to get a free copy of Live that comes with Drift, and that's like a nice set
I know
you
that.
could use,
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
which is really nice.
Yeah, no, Ableton is value package for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a video you did recently talking about like using the Studio Electronics Boomstar. I think it was like the 8106
Oh, yeah.
through Valhalla.
Yeah.
That sounded beautiful. That was
Oh, thanks, man.
you were talking about running a lot of your modular through like Valhalla, which is like a live action director's dream. It's just like this
Yes,
crazy,
that kind of
spacey,
that's what I was talking
dirty-
about, like that
Yeah.
when they're in the room and you kind of start tweaking knobs,
Yeah,
like the 8106, just stuff that they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
It gets very cool. Valhalla makes awesome stuff, and Studio Electronics is to me the greatest. I have Mini Moogs and I have a Jupiter 8 and all that, but I will say hands down, if like I had to trade in everything, I would never get rid of my Studio Electronics stuff.
wow.
It is. I have the ATC, the SE1X, the 8106, the SE02, couple of the SEM. I have like a lot of their Boomstar boxes and stuff. They're just like the greatest, man. I've replaced Mini Moog stuff so many times with the SE1X, where I just swore like, oh, nothing tops, that Mini Moog sound. It's so fat and stuff. And then like, I just played the same thing on the SE1X, and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
that is
Honestly,
even like bassier. How is this possible?
right. Yeah.
Amazing, man.
I saw your video of the 8106 and I was like, might have to go out and get me one of these. It's pretty
Oh
nice.
man, those Boomstars are serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
use those more than
dangerous.
even my modular stuff because they're so fast too.
Yeah.
They play amazing with Ableton because like a lot of times I keep a lot of patterns of stuff in MIDI in Ableton ready to go, and I'll just kind of throw them on. And I have the fortune of having all my old gear MIDified. So my Jupiter 8 has a Kenton MIDI in it. My Mini Moog has a Kenton MIDI. So I can grab one little clip in Ableton and send it off to like 7 legendary synths,
That's nice.
and just hear what comes back. And I'm like, it's really cool. Like, to be able to just kind of manipulate the arpeggio, the cutoffs, the swing, all that. And it's super cool.
What type of MIDI interface are you using to sync all those up?
Just use the Motu stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is great.
A lot of it's USB now, so it's like,
Right.
I got a lot of those when I got into the Electron stuff. They make these little Electron, one USB to MIDI interfaces. They're called the TF1 or something. It was created for the machine drum, and they're the tightest MIDI boxes I've ever used in my life. It's like the zero jitter, and they're probably 20 years old, maybe. They're these crazy little things. Yeah.
That's nice.
Here's one. Hold on.
That's pretty ideal. No one stuff
it's
sliding
like-
out.
They're super weird looking.
And it looks old.
Oh, no. So it has a USB and it has a MIDI.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Pretty simple.
I don't know what they put in these, but even if you look them up like on Craigslist or whatever, they're like $200 a pop at least.
Really?
Yeah, and all they do is
Seems high.
one. Oh no, it's crazy because now they're like discontinued.
Yeah.
But they have this thing called turbo mode, which works for Electron machines, and it increases the MIDI, I guess, definition to 10 times or 20 times speed of normal MIDI. And
Really? That seems
man,
fishy to me.
I know it seems fishy, but I've actually like sent in stems from USB straight to like, using the Apollo, using the SSL2 Plus, using that, using the Motu, all that. I kid you not, there's like 32 samples worth of latency extra in everything but that little box.
Really?
Yes. I'm talking like at the minute level of like, if you press play on Ableton and it triggers a beat off of the machine drum, or a beat off, or like an arpeggio off of, you know, a sequential Pro 2 or something.
Yeah.
If you pass that same MIDI through that little thing and that same MIDI through anything else that exists, that one will be tighter.
Wow. Maybe that's why it's still $200 on Craigslist or whatever.
Maybe, man.
So, makes sense.
Honestly, if you ever come across one, you don't need it because you don't have Electron stuff, or unless you do. But I've used it like with the Octatrack, which has USB, and it's still tighter. It's weird.
Okay.
I
Well, I trust you. I trust your opinion.
Well, I got all scientific on it just to make sure I wasn't like, snake oiling myself.
Right.
I'm like, am I really gonna pay that for that? Let me check. Oh yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, it's kind of like when you go in. Like, I went to buy some HDMI cables the other day. I had an emergency. I had to go to Best Buy. I couldn't wait to order it. And I walk in there, and they're like, "Yeah, you want these gold-plated, super high def like HDMI cables? $100 for a 6-footer." And I'm like, "What are we talking about here? Like, this is not going to make a huge difference. Like, why are you trying?" That is snake oil, in my opinion.
That is, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to pay $100 for a 6-foot HDMI cable. Like, I'm not that stupid.
No. So the stuff that isn't snake oil is like the stories of all the old gear. And again, I'm dating myself, but it just has more vibe, because like even the MPC 3000, it's like, so many people are saying like, well, why would you keep that? A, it's so expensive, and I overpaid for it anyway, probably. But like, why would you get that over the MPCX, which has everything, including connectivity to Loop Cloud and Ableton?
Yeah.
And Link and all this, like, unless you're kind of went through the hoops of like why certain old things are there, it doesn't really make sense. It's like they just see you as like, dude, you're just tied into your workflow and you're snake oiling yourself. And I bet you if you compared a WAV file from the MPCX, it would be fatter than your MPC. And it's not true. What is absolutely like that I've measured is that it's all about distortion. It's all about compression. That's what they do. It's not that like new stuff sucks and old stuff is like so much cooler. It's that there's all these quirks that no algorithm can match.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. When I spoke to Roger Lynn about the MPC 3000, he was kind of vague and super not interested in what I was talking about. I kind of was like, we were talking about the Tempest at the time, and he was all into the Tempest. And I'm like, yeah, the Tempest is cool. And I'm like, I got to say, I just got an MPC 3000 and I love it. And he's like, why? He goes, it's so limited compared to the Tempest. It's like, why? And I'm like, well, it has that swing. And he goes, what swing? He goes, I just got one template in there. Like, the Tempest has like 100 swings, and like, DAWs have 1,000 swings. Why are you so into your 3000? I'm like, wow, Roger Lynn is saying this. And then I kind of started talking to him, and I was like, well, I don't know, but here's the deal. When I start programming stuff, and then I add the hi-hats, and then I pass down the stems, my hi-hats are random, meaning some of them are rushed and some of them are laid back.
Really?
And I'm like, that doesn't exist when you hard quantize something.
No.
Unless you have a groove template that only does that, meaning every fifth one will be rushed, every seventh one will be laid back. Here's the thing. If you continually pass the same hi-hat, it will drift with time. And the ones that we're pushing will be laid back. And he looked at me and he goes, so you caught it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, we had a problem when I made that software for the, which we later corrected. but you must have the one that isn't like the forum OS. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, okay, we didn't have enough polyphony on the machine. So once you started maxing out past 4 notes on the same downbeat, the machine had to choose to move something forward or backward by a 9/60.
Interesting.
Tick. And I'm like, and it just chose wherever. It goes, it's just mathematical. Meaning,
Wow.
if you have a snare and then you mute the snare, your hi-hat's going to shift different. But you won't really notice. You'll just hear that it feels good.
Yeah.
So I started noticing, and I started taking elements out, and I started putting elements into the MPC, and I started passing down the hi-hats, and I started noticing that different things hit in different areas different.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, dude, that I cannot like get over. Like, that's the kind of thing that in my gut, if you gave me a blind test, there's something about vintage gear that does weird stuff like that I can't get from modern gear. I just can't.
Yeah.
I'm not an old fart. It's not that I'm crusty. Like, I've actually had I've had my assistant print stuff and send it to me with no names, out of order, and see if I could guess which one it is, and I always guess.
Really?
Like, what was the real Mini Moog versus what was like the UA Mini and what was like the SEO2 or the Behringer.
Interesting.
And whenever something came through, I'd be like, I'll tell you how I knew that was the Mini Moog in the cutoff. Like, it has this little snap that's a little pop. Just stuff like that. It's weird. My brain, I'm a nerd, man. What can I say? It's like,
hey, man, you're on the right podcast for that, though. I mean, it's a lot of nerds that are dialed in right now.
So
I get it. I get it. I think it's the imperfections that really make music more special, in my opinion, because everything is so locked into the grid. Everything is so perfectly synced and timed that, like, you go back to the humanistic nature of music and its progression. And when stuff is not perfectly tuned, or when it's a little bit at a time, it adds almost that more of that human error kind of character to the track that I think people want. I think that just sounds more real to us.
And honestly, I think things are going in a great direction, because if you think about it, everyone's implementing that into their algorithm. Like, think of UAD, for example, right?
Yep.
They started out with their clean cut, like, okay, this is our 1176 and this is our LA2A. And we made the best one, so trust us, this rocks. And now, every time there's a version 2 or a collection or whatever, what is it that they're actually selling? The first thing they said is, oh, we modeled the preamp nonlinear harmonic.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
What they basically mean is we modeled the stuff that was unmodelable. Like, the stuff that happened when, like, well, why does that happen when you're on ratio 4 and it doesn't happen on ratio 2?
Yeah.
Like, what's with this? They're starting to model the weirdness, and things are getting cooler and cooler. And take drift, for example. Drift. They're modeling the untuning of oscillators, the detuning of oscillators, which happens to all my stuff when I don't service it. You know, so it's like, again, it's like, obviously there's something to it.
Yeah. That
people will pay to get the mistakes.
Yeah. That's true. That's 100% true. I was talking to the Shadow Hills guys. Was it Gear? It wasn't Gear Fest. I was talking to them at a convention, and they were right next to the UAD guys, and they were both, the UA guy and the Shadow Hill guys were talking. I was talking to both of them, and they were talking about when they were working together on the mastering compressor and how it took them so many tries to get it right or to get it close. And most of the modeling they were doing is trying to get those imperfections. It wasn't necessary. They wanted to sound just like it. They wanted to have its own unique degraded character, which happens over a period of time.
And that's the coolest part. That's the coolest part of Moogs and things like that.
Yeah. I'll let you go. I know we both probably have things to do today or this week.
It's cool, man. It's fun.
It's been so fun. I'm so glad we got you on the podcast. But before we go, I just wanted to ask you a couple quick things I think people would really like to know from somebody like you who has so much experience.
Sure.
What advice would you give to, say, upcoming artists or designers or producers based off of your experience? And it could be open-ended. Like, what advice would you give to people who are up and coming, wanting to work with artists or in film?
Well, I mean, all of those kind of have different, I would say, different paths. You said artists, designers, or producers. Well, I would say for producers, I think that what's really important nowadays is to be pretty fast and prolific with your turnout. It's kind of ironic because there's so much out there and so many people are releasing tracks constantly.
Yeah.
That you would think of like, well, maybe I should take my time and make this a masterpiece and all that. And it's like, yes, it does need to be like top notch. But I think that what's important is that instead of like waiting so long to put out records, they should be pumping out singles and things like that on a constant basis and with a concept, if possible, meaning like, your sound is evolving, but it's very familiar. Like you have a certain brand, a certain sonic stamp in your sound. That's always what helped me out is that, I wasn't always like the DJ friendly guy when it came to remixes, but my remixes resonated with artists because to them, my song was kind of like a cooler up-tempo version of the song. It's kind of like the song they wish they would have been, and sometimes. And, and so, I would think that for anyone putting stuff out now, it's like, it's so important to really have one cohesive sonic quality to all of your stuff because it's so difficult when you're putting out, year to year or things like that. And one album sounds completely different from the next album and stuff like that. Because what ends up happening is that if you take artists, for example, that made it into film, like take the Stranger Things guys, right? I know Michael Stein. And, they got Stranger Things because the directors were fans of theirs without them knowing that the directors were fans.
Oh, interesting.
The best case scenario for anyone that wants to become a composer right now, and it applies to being an artist or a producer, is that you want to be on playlists where cool people are streaming your stuff. Meaning like there's more and more evidence of that happening. Like Nathan McKay, the guy that did HBO's Industry, he got a call because he's on a label that has really cool acts, and the showrunner for HBO Industry was actually looking for artists in that vein. So he tuned into playlists from this particular label, and then he happened to they sent his music, and he's like, "Oh, this guy's my composer."
Yeah.
It's happened to lots of guys. Basically, like you don't know who's your fan out there that for their next movie. I mean, yes, David Fincher called Trent Reznor, but I mean, Trent Reznor's, everyone loves Trent Reznor, but it's that kind of thing.
Sure.
The more I hear podcasts about how a lot of these young composers like come literally out of nowhere. These Stranger Things guys were working at a music store in Austin when they got Stranger Things.
Wow.
Yes. But Survive had a track on The Guest, and The Guest was produced or had something to do with the guys that were writing Stranger Things at the time. So they heard the song. It was a sync placement. That's another thing. And the more consistent you are, in the case of those guys, they got a sync placement. The directors heard that track and were like, oh my God, we need to at least get them to interview as composers for Stranger Things,
Yeah.
And I keep hearing that over and over again.
Yeah, I've heard a really good quote that ties in with that. It's like, it's not necessarily who you know, but who knows you.
Yeah. Now it's that. You don't know who's listening or who's looking at your Instagram or things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've had situations like that too. Not so much for film, but for like artists. I was working with a house artist called Samantha James, who was on Ohm Records, and we did Rise and had a couple Billboard #1 dance singles, things like that. And lo and behold, I get a call from Donna Summer's management, and they were like, "Hey, you're the guy that's doing the Samantha James records, right? Well, Donna has that on the iPod." And she's like, "She really loved this song and this song. Do you think you can send her something like that? Because she's working on her new album."
Cool.
I was like, damn, sure.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I mean, yes, we had some success. Like Samantha has a pretty big following in that world.
Of course.
But it's not something where you're like, oh, Dua Lipa's a fan, or I mean, it's not something where you figure like Grammy winning legends are listening to niche deep house playlists.
Yeah.
But they are.
Yeah.
They might.
You never know.
Who knows?
Especially with Spotify playlists or Discover Weekly or different things like that. You just never know who's going to pop up in your feed these days, or whose feed you're going to pop up in. Yeah.
So like if you have something that you really believe in, you really think is quality, kind of don't wait till it's a record. That's like the #1 mistake I see in a lot of people. They just, it's like it doesn't matter anymore. Like the drip feed singles, share it, tour it if possible, and just start promoting that sound.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's something we've talked about on the podcast too previously, about just being consistent, not being afraid to put yourself out there rather than, holding on to all these tracks, which a lot of people probably have a ton of tracks just sitting on their hard drive that are almost done. Just finish it off and put it out into the world and be consistent. I liked what you're talking about, like having a solid brand, having that sound you mentioned.
Yeah.
And quality obviously is important.
That's super important, because that's the one thing that comes up from all these guys that, that I love their music and they're getting these big scoring gigs, and it consistently is always that if you listen to the reason they got a certain scoring gig and the stuff they were putting out 2-3 years before that happened, it's all very consistent. And if you listen to the score they did, it sounds pretty much like those 2 years. Like if you listen to Stranger Things and then you listen to Survive, what they were doing before Stranger Things, it's Stranger Things.
No.
Yeah, it's like they were already doing it.
Yeah.
And like even Son Lux, the guys that did Everything Everywhere All at Once.
That was great.
Same
movie.
Exact situation. The Lee brothers or whoever were the directors called them. The agents didn't send them the music to get that gig.
Really?
Yeah. Because they put some of their stuff when they were actually writing the script to that massive movie. They were listening to Son Lux. I'm telling you, like sometimes it goes like when directors are fans of yours, you're in. Like it can be you against John Williams and you'll get it.
That's cool. Yeah, just invite them over and let them play on the push.
Well, that's the problem, right? You don't know who it is.
Yeah.
But it teaches you, I mean, I've even taken, I'm pretty terrible at releasing stuff because I'm always so busy and I don't really consider myself an artist. I always like releasing stuff with someone else as a vehicle.
Yeah.
But even myself, I've been like, if I really have a track that I love, like I will turn down gigs or whatever just to pump that out. Because it's so like true how like, people are going to be, the new calling card is them finding you. That's true.
So with the calling card of them finding you, is there any quick tips as far as how you could help them discover you or get yourself out there other than just releasing a song on DistroKid and hoping for the best?
Well, the best thing you could do is probably get a sync placement. Because that's what happened to a lot of these guys. And do it for free, the sync placement. I know people are going to be like crucifying me for saying this, but
it's generous.
Well, it doesn't have to. This is just advice.
Sure.
But I'm saying if you are somebody like, there's a lot of talk about artists getting screwed by music supervisors and all that. It's a very frustrating thing because I agree with it. Nobody should do anything for free. But at the same time, some of these low budget films and stuff like that truly are low budget. You think that just because it's going on a film, like, oh, they should at least give me $1,000 or whatever. But really, honestly, a lot of times the big guys get most of the money. And then sometimes they really are left with $100, $200 for the sync. But everybody out there, before you kill me, what you have to remember is that if you were to give a sync for free, for example, and I would only do it if you really, really believe in the project. Meaning like somebody's doing an indie film, which is like the next, like the next Everything Everywhere All at Once or something killer like that. And they're like, look, you're unknown, kind of unsigned. You've got 2,000 monthly listeners. We don't have the budget because we're all booked up, but we love your song. If you want to give it to us, it's not for free. It's called a gratis license, which means you don't get paid up front for it, but they place it in the film, and then you make residuals every time it streams from your PRO, either ASCAP or BMI.
Yeah.
Here's why I think artists make mistakes when they're like, if they don't give me something up front, it's a no. Because if you were to turn down Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example, right? If you had 20 seconds of a track on that, from your PRO alone, you'd probably already be banking around 22 to 25 grand per year.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
So if you really turned them down because the music supervisor was offering you $100, it turned out to be a financial mistake.
Yeah. If you could get those residuals. Yeah.
Well, but look, I worked on Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah.
And I did the Rick James track. And I won't make this long, but this is a perfect example of how you never know. That track was another track that they temped, and then the artist pulled out. And they were left with this movie, and they had to go to Sundance. And I had about a week to turn it around and make Super Freak work with the choreography. Well, honestly, I turned it down at first. I was like, this is too stressful. The money was bad.
Really?
It was an indie film, like when I saw Little Miss Sunshine, I was like, this could like go straight to like streaming. Honestly, like why am I gonna kill myself for this? But something in me was like, it's a good movie. Why not? It's cool. Yeah. It's challenging. Blah blah blah. I did it, and man, it's like probably one of the things that has gotten me the most remixes out of most. That like having my name associated to, I mean, how many Oscars did it win? Like 10?
Yeah.
Having your name associated with something massive, even if it wasn't like the score or whatever, it's instantly a calling card for future work.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm not saying give your music away for free, but I'm saying if you're in a situation where an opportunity comes, don't always look at the upfront fee as the determining factor. That I want to phrase it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I know Matty Harris gave some similar advice, and he's done mastering for Kelly Clarkson and a lot of other people. And he did a lot of free masters before his name started hitting some bigger charts. And then next thing you know, he's getting paid, 10 to 15 times more than what he was ever making in the beginning, just because he had that credibility. Yeah.
I'm also only talking about sync placement because there's a big difference. Don't ever give up your publishing for free. Don't ever give up your song for free. Don't ever give the ownership up to a company or a producer or anyone. The thing about sync placements is that it's a rental. You're renting your song. Meaning, if you don't get any money up front, it's still your song. You can still put it out on your album.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. The worst that can happen is it didn't really go anywhere. The best that can happen is it becomes an absolute smash and you make 50 grand in 10 years.
Yeah.
And it propels your name. It gives you something, to be like, okay, cool. Well, my song, blah, 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 is on this soundtrack. Okay, cool. That opens doors.
Yeah.
Especially in the film world. So,
Yeah.
it's
No,
a toss up.
makes perfect sense to me, man, for sure. And yeah, like I said, it's not always who you know, but who knows you. So if somebody sees your name in the
Yeah.
credits and you worked on something, then it might hit you up. That could be your next paycheck for the next few years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the mailbox money is important. For artists, I mean, I'm sure everybody already knows that
Yeah.
because everybody's, sync placement, it has become like the new getting signed.
Yes.
And it's true. It's like the amount of money that you can make off of silly thing is silly.
Yeah.
Like things you never imagined. You're like, wow, if I would have turned that down, I'd be really sorry.
Totally. Yeah. That's true. Well, thanks, man. This is all really good advice. I'm sure I speak on behalf of a lot of people that this has been a really interesting, useful conversation, especially in the world of film, which I know is foreign to a lot of producers out there. So this might hopefully inspire some of them to get more involved and maybe release some more tracks, maybe look more into the sync world and looking into composing and remixing. So
Yeah.
you've done some awesome things, and super
thanks,
appreciate your time and you hanging out on the podcast, and you're welcome back anytime. So
thank you, man. Anytime. And if you have any questions or anything, hit me. If anyone wants to hit me up on social media or whatever.
I was going to ask you, where's the best place for people to follow you?
I'm pretty bad because I'm always busy, but Instagram is my favorite in terms of, where I check and stuff like that. So
cool. Well, everybody there, you heard it. Check out the links in the show notes if you want to follow Sebastian, aka ROCAsound. And yeah, man, maybe we'll have you back in the future. And if you're ever in Denver, hit me up.
I will. You'll take me skiing, right?
Yeah, I will. Let's go. Actually, that's on the list this year. I didn't get to go last year, but this year for sure. So you're welcome.
I love Vail, Aspen, all that stuff is so killer.
Telluride. Yeah, they're all beautiful, man.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, man. It was an honor.
Dude, same. Likewise. I appreciate you. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Later.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you don't hate the podcast, please leave a 5-star review, and you can do that on Spotify. Also, speaking of Spotify, if you want to interact with me and talk about this episode, share your thoughts, you can go to Spotify, go to this episode, and then you can leave a comment, tell me your thoughts, and all that good stuff. Check back on Tuesdays for new episodes, and make sure that you give Sebastian a follow. Check out the links in the show notes, and I will see you next time.